Hi, this video we're going to learn how to build a simple chatbot which is based on the OpenAI's models, and we'll run it directly in our CLI. Here are some of the constraints that we have. So we're expected to create the chatbot to run continuously. So create a loop that continuously reads user input and exits cleanly. So we want the loop to prompt the user exactly with the U with a colon, and then exit when the user types any of these. So create, exit, then slash create. Ignore empty input. That means if the user hits enter, we should read prompts without calling the API. Then we should, when the user types create, we should exit, and also typing an empty line does not call the LLM, as we have said. But before we do any of these, there is an important thing that we need to understand when it comes to making calls to APIs, these LLM models. So the first thing that you want to understand is that everything that you need to know about implementing things like this can be found on the provider's website. So you are not necessarily expected to memorize any of these because they keep changing. So what is very important is to figure out how to navigate their documentation so that anytime you want to implement any functionality, you can go there and look for it yourself. So currently we want to implement a chatbot, and that is essentially under what you call text generation. So we can go to OpenAI's platform. The platform is at platform.openai.com. So we go to that portal and let's open it here. So we're looking for text generation, and you see down here on the interface, when you get there, you see, so usually I think you land on dashboard. Then from dashboard, you'd find docs at the top here. So you can click on docs to come to that interface. Then we have read and generate text. That's what we want to start with. So you click that, and you can go through this to understand exactly how to implement this. In the previous video, I covered the text generation using this, but now we want to build out a chat that has conversational history. So it is important for us to understand a few other things. And the example is what is shown here, where we provide what is called roles and instruction. So let me go back and explain what that means. When we send any requests to the model, so let's say this is GPT-5 that we are sending a request to. GPT-5 in itself does not have any form of memory, so it is not able to store the history of the conversation we're having with it. So if you're using, say, ChatGPT, even though you see that ChatGPT remembers, at least now it remembers the conversation that you've had with it, it is not because GPT-5, which is powering your conversation, has memory. It is just because the AI engineers who built ChatGPT have built a way to store the conversation. And that's what you need to know when you're building something like this. The GPT-5 itself would not have memory, and you have to build it into your application code. So how we manage that is, of course, you can do some sort of in-memory storage, or you can use databases, or even caching. However you manage to store the conversation, what is important is to understand the structure that you're going to store the conversation history in, because the model, according to OpenAI, expects the request that is coming to it in a specific format. And one of such is the request that is being sent to it needs to be in the format where you identify the role and the content. What this means is that for each section of the content that you are sending, you have to identify who is or who has this part of the conversation. So it's like sending somebody who doesn't remember you. I think of a dementia patient who doesn't remember anything, right? Like even in old age, this happens. But If the person doesn't remember you and you want it to remember you, what you do is you tell it what you said initially, right? Then you tell it the response the person gave you. So in this our case, we're going to have a role known as user. The user is whoever is prompting the chatbots that we're working with. Then we'll have another role called the assistant. And the assistant is actually the AI model that we are dealing with. So the contents then becomes, what did this user say? Maybe this user told the AI model what their name is and say, I am Obed, or my name is Obed. Say that's what the user told the assistant. Then the assistant said, hi, Obed. Nice to meet you. Something like that. In this case, we're going to store them accordingly, where we have row user said the content, which is I am Obed, and row assistant said the content, which is hi Obed. It means if I make another request where the row user is saying the content, maybe it's asking back this model or this assistant, what is my name? Because I go with this context, the request I'm making has to have this entire conversation as its history. The AI would then be able to understand that, oh, your name is Obed. You said it earlier and I greeted you. So it will now tell you, your name is Obed. That's what the assistant will be able to tell you. If we make the request with just this, without the previous conversation that we had, then it would not even remember anything. So that is the caveats that we need to pay attention to. And in our case, we're going to write this code in Python. So we're going to use a list of dictionaries to manage this. Let's go into the terminal, the code editor, to explain that. So to speed up things, I've already written it. I'll just walk you through every one of them. Import OS, import.env, and import OpenAI. Of course, you need to import OpenAI because the SDK, which is the software development kit that they have developed for us to be able to communicate with their API, is available through this package that we have installed. Then these two packages will help us access our EMV, which is our environment variables. If you want to understand any of these, and check the very first video that I created on the AI engineering part, you would understand this. Then this helps us load the environment variable so that we can grab it. Now we're grabbing the environment variable with this line here. Then we need to initialize the OpenAI client. This is what we'll be using to communicate directly or sending requests to the model. So what we do here, I'm just creating using a functional programming approach where I've created this function and put everything in function so that when we execute it, it will be executed directly within this function. Okay, here we start off by creating this variable called messages, where it is going to represent a list of dictionaries, and the dictionary contains the key is a string and the value is also a string. So we initialize it with an empty list or an empty array, depending on the language you're coming from. Then we wanted to run this as a loop. It's more of a forever loop. So we say while true. That means it's always going to be true until something within it breaks. So we go ahead to implement it. User input is equal to input u column. This is like the prompt that we're giving the user before they type in their prompt. So what you see on the terminal, where so that you know that it's my time to type something, we say you. Then we check that response that we are getting. So the response we are getting from the user is what we've called as user underscore input, and we convert that to lowercase. The reason why we do this is because we're told that it should be case insensitive. That means whether the person uses the lowercase or uppercase, we should consider them the same. So we try to force everything to a lowercase so that irrespective of the case that was used, we can still handle them. If we check, we are checking if any of what the user type is in any of these. So if the user type quit or exit or /quit, then we are breaking from the loop. All right. Usually I like to print out something and say goodbye. That tells the user that you have exited the program. If not, so if it is not in any of these, what we want to do is we want to strip off any empty spaces. And you see there was something about typing an empty line does not call the LLM. So we want to make sure that if it is empty, when you use a strip on it, it means that there's nothing there. So at least we would be able to proceed without causing any harm. So here we just run continue. That means don't do anything, just continue with the rest of the program. Then we append this message. So this is where you want to pay attention to. We are appending this dictionary right here to our list. And our list, you remember, this is the list of dictionaries that we have representing messages. So essentially what we are doing is we are grabbing what the user actually typed and we are adding it to this empty list so that we are building that conversation history, because it is important that anytime we make a request to the API or to the model, we need to go along with the entire history of the conversation. That's the reason why we are building up the messages list and we add onto it with the .append method. So the row, as I said earlier, row is equal to user. Then the content that this user is providing is user underscore inputs. Then to be able to call the model itself, you use client.chat.completions.create. So all of these things are not magic. You do not conjure them on your own. These are documented approaches. So every AI or LLM provider has their own implementation. So you need to just check their documentation to see exactly how to call this. But in OpenAI's case, this is how we call it. So you go ahead and call client.chat.completions.create. Then you call the model name. Then now you pass the messages. So they expect this messages object. You pass the value messages, which is our list of dictionary that we have created here. So the first time we are sending it is just sending the very first thing that you sent it, right? Then this we call this variable completion. That is whatever text that is added to it. But from that completion, we get a JSON response. And based on that JSON response at position 0 in choices, we would be able to get message. Then from message, we'll be able to get the content. So we grab that and pass it to a variable that we call response. Then we are able to now print out the response. This means exactly what the model gave us. But remember that we are trying to build up the history. So what do? We now go ahead and append that response as well to the messages by creating a new dictionary with row to be assistant and the content to be the response. Then we append it. Since this is a forever loop, it's going to now go back and prompt the user again, you. Then whatever the user adds or input will be added to these messages. Of course, if you are dealing with a live or production application that users are going to use, you would want to use a more persistent storage service like a database to store this, because as soon as we quit the program, we're going to lose all the messages here. But the point we are trying to illustrate is that you can keep track of all the conversation you've had. And because when you are calling the chat model, when you're calling the OpenAI model, you are passing the entire message list. It will have the entire conversation with it, and that is the approach to go with this. So we can execute this by running Python 3, then we have OpenAI as a file. So we run this and you see I get a prompt U. So let's say I tell it my name is Obed and wait for the response. It says, nice to meet you, Obed. How can I assist you today? Just because we created that message conversation history, you should remember my name. So what is my name. And now you see your name is Obed. How can I help you today? So it remembers my name. If we didn't send that message, if we didn't send this message and we rather said something like the user input directly, if we just send the user input, let's try this. Exit. So we've exited the program. Let's run it again and say, my name is Obed. All right, something is broken. I didn't pay attention to it. Let's see, invalid type for messages. Okay, so I understand we will have to restructure this because it's expecting a dictionary which we didn't give as a dictionary. But the point I wanted to illustrate is that if you do not build up the conversation history, so the way to avoid this, I mean, we can let it happen like that, but what it means is that we might not necessarily append this to the conversation all the time. However, the point has been illustrated that for you to be able to get history in your chatbot, you need to have the conversation history managed by yourself in your application code so that you can always refer to it. The one other thing that I found out from the OpenAI's documentation, which you want to pay attention to, is another role called the developer role. So the developer role is what you, the developer of the application, is adding as a set of instructions that the model needs to obey, and it will prioritize that over every other thing. So that is the first priority for it. So that is how you would be able to tell the model to maybe respond to only certain conversations. Maybe you're building an application in health and somebody is asking something else, or you are building an application where you don't want people to use it as a replacement of, say, professional medical advice. So you explicitly tell it with the developer role. I think previously it used to be called a system role. So I don't know if this replaces the system role entirely or it's a new one. However, this is giving preference. So if you want your application to behave in any unique way, then you need to indicate that as well. So you add it to your chat conversation or the conversation history. In our example, that would be as part of the messages that we created. So that is how you create your own chatbot in Python using the CLI. And I'll see you in the next video.